personalization practices, mastery grading, graduate profiles, those kinds of things, then we will be able to improve the other necessary conditions for powerful teaching and learning and the ability to scale them. And so that's kind of the impetus behind the organization. Hopefully, we're able to get all 5 of our school and systems leaders represented here, but we also have other really strong practitioners in the room with us. So maybe that conversation will come naturally. To discuss their experiences leading and supporting better measures for learning. So what we're going to do is we're going to just moderate a discussion around these 3 basic questions for something, for anything new. What is it? Why do we need it? Why do we want to do it? And how does it work? So we'll ask those questions and moderate a discussion around what it looks like in our different contexts. Hopefully from these couple of webinars and future work that we can gather additional feedback with and presentations, we can start to build a common vision with a group of folks, particularly in North Carolina, but hopefully scaling beyond eventually, to really establish a common vision of what it looks like to take on better measures for learning and what the results are and what gets in the way of that actually working well, in particular policy and other kinds of constraints. So, but first I would love for you guys to introduce yourselves briefly. So if you wouldn't mind, whether you're on the panel or not, just go ahead and just tell us who you are and where you're from and what your experience level is with better measures. And I'm using that in a very generic way. So if you're new and you're not quite sure what it means to you, that's fine, say that. If it's something that you've been working with for a long time, please give us an idea of what it is you do. So can we start with the first one on my Zoom grid? I'll start with Anne.
Yeah, for sure. Looking forward to this conversation. Ann Jones, co-founder of District C. We are really working to prepare educators to be great coaches of the human skills. I'll go ahead and use that terminology. My experience level with better measures, I've been in the education sector my whole life, starting as a 6th grade and 8th grade science teacher and sort of fast forwarding all the way through the various conversations. And so I'm not sure how to qualify that. Medium well.
That's a good spot.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Anne. How about moving on to Dr. Case?
Kim, please, but thank you. I am the coordinator of innovation in Caldwell County Schools, which is new to our district still. My journey through education has been from a middle school teacher to a facilitator, instructional facilitator, and then a school administrator, and then into this role, which is actually a role that I've had the privilege to define in some ways. So looking at educational innovation and what can that mean in a very broad sense. So that's where I come from.
Very cool.
Thank you.
If y'all don't mind, you can just pick up when someone leaves off.
Hi, I'm Jay Korick, and I'm co-owner of Constructive Learning Design. So I'm partnering with Ben and Liz on this new community and excited about it. I'm a former digital media teacher. So I came into teaching by way of documentary filmmaking, and then became a teacher and then a coach. And then most recently co-founded and own Constructive Learning Design. So I guess with better measures, we do a few things. We work with schools and districts, mostly in North Carolina, to help them improve their measures. So standards-based grading, we work with schools on that, performance tasks, and project-based learning.
Thank you, Jay.
I'll go. I'm Liz Beck. I work with Jay and Ben. I'm a former English teacher and current instructional coach. And yeah, we do all those things Jay said we did. Uh, and I had a personal experience with Better Measures that when I was in the classroom, I went from being a very old school style, like, let's take a reading quiz on what color was Gatsby's car in chapter 7 kind of teacher, to sort of coming all the way on the other end of the spectrum, which was a lot of fun and really enlightening. And now I would like to help other people figure out how to go down that path too.
Thank you.
I think I can follow that. I can relate to that story, Liz. My name's Joey Lee. I'm a Chief Learning Officer at Lift Learning, and I've spent my career in education, starting the classroom in New Hampshire, where I too was I hope you're not offended by this, Liz, but I too was giving useless assessments at various times in gotcha fashion, and it was foolish, and it was a point of starting a career. And I learned a lot in my journey teaching in New Hampshire. Was part of one of the early pilots for PACE performance assessments and competency-based movement in New Hampshire. Spent some time with the DOE. Spent a number of years in global education, and now work for Lift Learning, where we are a community of schools coast to coast. Our platform facilitates learner-centered practices. I think the most common denominators between all the schools that we do work with is project-based learning, learner-led project-based learning, and competency-based education through a portfolio assessment system. So happy to be here and listen and contribute if I can. And thank you, Ben and team, for also bringing this community together. So excited to be here.
Great. And if you're just coming on, we are, you may have noticed we are introducing ourselves and giving us an idea of what experience level you have with this concept of better measures. A few more we'd like to hear from. Miss Rossmeyer, do you mind joining in?
Yeah, I'm Rebecca Rolfsmeyer. I am, and right now I'm currently in the role of an assistant principal at a high school in Spencer, North Carolina. And I started off in education working as an EC teacher. So in the EC world, a lot of stuff is competency based, but I'm a novice as it applies to other classrooms and the way that it operates in the general ed curriculum. And I'm sorry, we just finished up dismissal, so I've kind of been listening to multiple things.
We're glad you're here. Thank you. And Ashley?
I have attended one other webinar with Better Measures, but I actually also work with Ms. Rossmeyer as well at her school. But I'm going to keep my camera off because I just had surgery, so I don't want anybody scared. But yeah, but yeah, I was very intrigued by the last webinar that we did, and so was excited to see the invitation for this one. Just looking forward to learning more.
Great. And Michael and Debbie, do you guys have the capacity to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I can introduce myself. I'm going to stay off camera as well because we're in a car, but we're almost home. So that means I'll have a good internet connection here shortly. And I'm not familiar exactly with Better Measures as far as the organization, but I am curious to learn more about that. And so just my background a little bit, I've been teaching for about 25 years. Most of my work has been in the community college arena, but I've taught everything from kindergarten to graduate school. And how I assess students has definitely changed over the years. And I teach computer information systems, but I have a background in English and linguistics, so I always make my students communicate. And more I use reflective assessments because I feel that that gives me a better idea of what they actually got out of the experience instead of some sort of bubble-in test or forced essay or something.
Very cool.
Oh, and I'm here in Murphy, North Carolina on a crazy project that Ben knows all about. So I'm open to all kinds of ideas.
Glad you're here, Debbie.
And hi guys, my name is Michael Flager. You can call me Flager. There are a lot of Michaels in the world. There were 5 of them in my elementary school classroom. So rather than being Michael E, D, and F, we just went by last names. I currently teach at Old Saybrook High School in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. I've spent 4 years there. Before that, 10 years in New York City public schools, mostly middle school, 8 years in middle school, 2 years teaching in a high school. Before that, my public education was all in New York City, K through 12, and then I went to through the CUNY system for my undergrad and graduate degree. I did not take a typical path to the classroom. I was part of the New York City Teaching Fellows, which similar to something like Teach for America, for those of you that aren't familiar with the New York City Teaching Fellows, except the biggest difference would be the commitment time. Most Teach for America programs, or most folks that I know that went through the program, there was an expectation that it was a stepping stone onto some other kind of path or career in education or outside of education. And for the New York Teaching Fellows, it was mostly for career changers. And so I was one of the few young, right out of college students that didn't necessarily see a path to the classroom through my higher education. And still I knew that my abilities as a coach and as a human to connect, I knew the classroom was a place for me. And so I've been there for a while now, 14 years. Not as long as some of you guys, but I'm really excited to share perspectives and hear stories from such a diversity of perspectives, for lack of a better another word. In terms of better measures, this is the first call I'm on. I had a few colleagues attend the last session, and I'm just excited to really understand and get some views from across the spectrum on what everyone thinks a better measure is, because like some of you have already mentioned, all of us are educated in a different century. And so, we've all had those 10-question vocab quizzes on a Friday, or those spelling tests where you got one wrong and you had 95 and that's who you were. And it's like, that means 95% accuracy. That's pretty damn good. But it's like, but I got a 0 out of 1 on that one word. So the skill of spelling versus my accuracy and memorization, what exactly are you assessing? So I'm really excited to really just kind of pick apart the concept of what it means to be a better measure, because I'm in a district where there's a constant push and pull of folks who want to prepare kids for the ivory tower that they perceive to exist, versus folks who believe we build the towers we choose to exist in, and we can make a tower look like however the hell we want it to. I've gotten a chance to work with Ben Pendarvis a few times now as a coach. He's been working with me on curriculum for my English classroom in American Lit and Humanities. And even just today, Ben got an email with some reflections of our seniors and the work that's been inspired through Open Way Learning and the other OWL folks has just been, it's more than a breath of fresh air. It's kind of like we're finally living. We were alive, but now we're living. So that's the easiest way for me to describe that.
Wow, very cool. Good. So I'll close this up here, but thank you for saying that, Michael, or Flager, I should say, that this is a very exciting opportunity just to have these folks in the room, to have a conversation about what you do and how you make it happen. And so a little bit about me, and we'll get right to it. So I am have been always wanted to be a teacher, convinced my teachers in 7th grade to let me teach for them. And, got started then, and went right into education world, and went into the traditional measures, and realized that it wasn't really working for me or the kids very quickly. And eventually found another way through a graduate degree program at Minnesota State University. It was program in experiential education. So I got a real study of all of these different based learnings that we see now. So project-based learning, problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning, competency-based learning. And all of those things are based on this theory of experiential education. And so got a really good view of that, and went into Tri-County Early College High School over in Murphy, North Carolina for the last 10 years to find ways to make that, to see what that looks like. And so I'm just happy to be here and have more folks to talk to about it. So before we begin sharing questions, I do want to just say that we do have some norms for the group. So I just want to kind of establish some ground rules here. Our webinar norms go by the MOVER acronym. This is one that I stole from the Hope Street group. I will give credit. So hopefully you don't tell anybody there and they find out, but be mindful, open to new ideas, vulnerable, engaged, and reflective. Otherwise we may be missing something. And if you're an audience, then I think we're going to be a little more flexible on this particular webinar. You guys feel free to jump in at any time. You can ask your own questions. You can put them in the chat. You can add your thoughts to that the panel may be speaking on as well. And what I'll try to do is I'll try to give the panel a chance to speak to the questions, and then I might say, I'll give you a cue to say, all right, are there other additional comments from the audience that we should to keep that piece going? But I will try to moderate us to get through the what, the why, and the how by the end of the time. And so I may have to move us along a little quicker than we're ready. So thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. So our questions are up here on the board. We'll just kind of leave them there as a frame of reference for you. But of course, we're going to start with the first question. What is it that the schools and the teachers that you work with are measuring with their students? That's the first thing that we're really interested in. The other piece to that is, of course, you're not necessarily the ones measuring those for their students. So what is it that you do? What kind of tools, resources, mindsets, strategies do you use to support those teachers or those schools in particular identifying and assessing better measures in our framework here? So feel free to join in when you're ready, and we'll just do it kind of popcorn style and see where the conversation leads.
Well, Ben, I can start because my situation's a little different in that I'm not currently in a school, but in a system. And so my area is educational innovation as a whole, which includes all these wonderful things that we've talked about, but spent some time working with actually Appalachian State University and the Educational Innovation Network, NC, to define innovation, educational innovation, and not box it in, but give it some frame so that when we talk about how we get to these innovative ways of measuring and better measures, what would we be measuring? And I've really found it's an intersection of social emotional learning, the human skills, and then those other pieces that you need to make that work. And so there's a frame that we've come up with, and it starts with really trusting relationships within a collaborative culture, visionary leadership, risk-taking participants, a networked community, which is why I'm here, because it doesn't work without everyone together. And then at the end of that, what we end up with, if all is done well, are some equity-focused systems that we need. Now, within that, there's strategies, because if you've been in schools or you're a teacher, you need some strategies to work with those kids. So strategies that have been identified by the Canopy Project, which includes these competency-based measures, are one of about 10 that have been identified in some of the more innovative schools, especially in North Carolina. So looking at those strategies, figuring out how to measure those. And for me, listening to some of the ideas that are out there in classrooms where people are doing that work is what I'm really excited to hear, because that's the piece where we're a little stuck, not terribly stuck, but it's messy measurements, competency-based, and finding where every student starts, and then those logistical challenges for teachers in the classroom inside of this political structure we're in. So that's my area of expertise. I'll just back off and listen some, but I'm very interested in networking and finding out how do we transform the system to make it a better system for students and ultimately for us. So thank you.
So,
I'm going to jump in there because I'm already excited about something. Ms. Case, could you share the framework that you were describing across there were four distinct things that I think my district is trying to do, and they just use different words for it. But you were describing the matrix that I kind of have in my mind when I taught middle school. I was part of a team that got to build a middle school from the ground up. And we would use a grading matrix where it was standards based, and we called them work habits based, which is essentially 21st century skills, those human skills. And we designed a matrix, so that if a kid got a 3 and a 3, they were getting an 85. And so the better measures in New York City, we were using the measurements we wanted, but we had to conform to that 100-point scale that all 1,200 schools were reporting with. So I'm already excited because I want you to send me a draft. I want to see that matrix and what it looks like on your end, because it's been a lot of years. And I pitched when I first got to Old Saybrook, I pitched that matrix to folks, and I got a lot of head nods, and then the department meeting ended. And so we move on from there. And I'm just excited because it sounds like we don't seem to know what the better measures might look like. And now it's just a matter of systematically introducing them, and factoring in those baseline diagnostics, those entry events, and how can we turn an entry event into a useful information piece, and how can we use rubrics, which is something in an English classroom. It seems very transparent. It's seamless, the transition. Whereas when I talk to some of my colleagues in the sciences and maths, for a lab report, a rubric makes sense. But for somebody that's trying to test the knowledge of a kid who sat through AP Bio, they say they can't use a rubric for a test. And then I say, why do you need a test? And then, of course, it's AP Bio. We need tests. I'm already excited and curious to see what kind of things we can share out in that sense. So, thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Kim, for bringing the Education Innovation Network into the play here, because they are doing, you guys have been doing a lot of great work thinking about these same questions already. So hopefully so a couple of those articles there can get you to learning more about who those folks are.
And it is a small group, but we are growing that network as well. So looking forward to that.
We had Robert Smith on last time listening in, and so he's also aware of the better measures. What else do you guys, how else do you support your teachers or your schools to create better measures or to work with better measures? And if you know what those measures are that those teachers and schools are working with, please share those as well.
So we're kind of in a unique situation. This is my first year working fully in K-12. So we've worked with K-12 students for quite a long time, but more on the homeschooling end of things or the private sector end of things. And in college, at least in the college classes that I teach, the way that I measure things is probably different than the way that a lot of my colleagues measure things, because I do focus in, like I mentioned, on reflective learning, even for computers, even for technology. Like everything I teach is high tech, but tell me why you're doing it, or how you're doing it, or how you came to that choice, why'd you make that decision? So it drives my students crazy, I think, probably, because they're like, it's a computer class, why do I have to write anything? But I think in the end, it gives a much better view. So in the situation that we're in right now, we're battling a little bit against traditional, like I come from a very constructivist philosophy and background. And we're battling a little bit against the very traditional, we've got to measure it, we've got to test it, we have to do worksheets, this kind of like this very traditional thing. And somebody just mentioned like, SELs and, the emotional piece of it. And I feel like what we've been doing for the last 3 months is just building some groundwork with the kids. Like they're in such a messed up place right now that you can try to cram stuff down their throat and say, okay, now it's time to learn it. You got to learn it. Here, we're going to learn it. And I'm going to test you if you don't learn it, right? Or if you do learn it. But we've just been working on making those connections with them so that we can give them a solid foundation to launch them into some experiences that really will be interesting to assess and to figure out how to assess. Some community-based learning, some project-based learning. So I'm actually here to get ideas from people about how you're already maybe doing some of these things, because I'm on the ground floor of this. Like I've been teaching for a long time, but we're trying to do something really different here. And so it's exciting to hear with the introductions and some of the things that have been said already. I feel like this is going to be a really useful experience. So I don't know if I can add a lot other than enthusiasm for the process.
Yeah, yeah. So at North Rowan over there in Spencer, what are you guys measuring over there?
So a couple years ago, we actually started with what we call our design labs, using Stanford University and their design school and their design thinking model. We introduced that to what we call our lower school, which is 9th and 10th grade. And we really do focus on our soft skills, our communication, our collaboration, and help our students solve real world problems. So it really started there. And as an administrative team, the biggest way that we have supported our teachers with all of this, with switching to competency-based, standards-based grading and working in those design labs and using the design thinking philosophy, is we've really supported what we call failing forward. So allowing our teachers and our students and everyone to know it's okay to make mistakes, and we learn from those mistakes. And if it wasn't successful the first time, go back and try again. And we encourage lots of feedback. The administrative team goes through classrooms, we walk through, and we give a lot of feedback based on what we're trying to accomplish. So now that we're working on switching to competency-based grading, our teacher walkthrough tool focuses on the alignment and the rigor that we see in our classrooms.
Very cool. Good. Ashley, is there anything that you might add to that? I'm sure there's other pieces to that you might be working with on your end.
She said most of it. My role, as I'm a teacher and I'm also now an instructional coach, so I use I'm using what we've learned to try to guide the teacher-led design team as far as trying to make decisions on how to improve our school towards these directions. So we've been working on a professional development plan, and we've been working on things that we can do in the classroom to help our teachers kind of get there. Since, like she said, CBE is fairly new for us. So we're working on it almost as a pilot within the school, and just trying to, work to be better in the classroom. I am still a classroom teacher as well, and I'm one of the classrooms that's doing the CBE. I teach math. And so I've been trying to kind of jump in the deep end myself and figure out ways to do this better as well. So I'm looking forward to being a sponge and learning anything I can from this process.
Very cool. And kudos to you for being a math teacher, trying something new. We need more. It's a scary thing. I know that classroom. So, and what about you? You talked about the human skills, that, being great coaches of the human skills. I love that, that phrase. What does that mean to y'all, and how do you measure it?
Yeah, Debbie, when you were kind of painting this picture of, how do you move into these places where students are engaged with the community, and, it's experiential learning and they're solving problems. That's kind of the world we live in. But you think about this word measurement. I mean, if we can actually get kids doing that kind of work, which I think this call anyway, we all know that's that's really valuable and important. What do you measure? And I think, this idea of what are you looking for is, and then what do you say when you see it is really kind of sticking with me right now. Yeah, Rebecca, your comment there, just this idea of feedback as measurement. We don't often think of those words together, but from our point of view, that is the how, the feedback. Anyway, so this conversation's got me thinking about a lot of those pieces. But, I think for us at District C, we focused really intentionally to prepare our coaches. If you're going to be a great coach of human skills, you've got to know the what and the how. That is, what am I looking for and how am I going to give that feedback? So our work has really centered around creating a point of view on that. And I also am just really struck, but y'all are hitting on this on the call, but this is really different. Like, so if you're in the content area, we're going to teach kids content. You kind of know what you're looking for, right? You're looking for, did they spell it right? What was the color of the car in The Great Gatsby? We also talk a lot about skills. So there's academic skills like note taking, or there's technical skills like CAD software. And I think you think about like, how would we measure those things? So, if you're learning CAD software, for example, or which is like 3D solid modeling, they need to know how to use the software, and they need to know where the buttons are and how to actually build this cup in a 3D model type of way. So like, you kind of think about like the what, like what are we doing? So for us, when you talk about human skills, that's very different, right? I was actually talking to a guy that's UConn, and he's a real expert in creativity. Jonathan Plucker is his name. And, I was saying like, Jonathan, how do you measure creativity? And he said, well, if you want, I can write you multiple choice tests and measure creativity. Or we can do the old, you have 5 minutes to write down how many ways you can use a brick. That was a very standard, like, I'm not making that up. That is actually a way that people measure creativity. And he's like, we could do that, score it, spit a number out the other end. He said, I have no idea why you would do that. Because the beauty of engaging kids, so what, we're engaging kids in solving real problems, solve a real problem for a business in the community. He's like, I don't know why you would want to isolate creativity as a variable and try to figure out how to measure it. Because what's amazing about what you're doing is they're using that creativity, but all the other human skills and all the complex problem solving and all the figuring out how to work with my team. And it's all happening together. So that's kind of like the interesting challenge of measurement, where we sort of feel this need to isolate the variable to somehow turn it into a number. So our point of view doesn't sound anything like that when we're trying to measure students, really flexing their muscle for human skills. What we're looking for are behaviors. What we're looking for is, what do high performing teams look like and sound like? What do they do? And as a coach, that's what I'm looking for. And at District C, we're helping you build that point of view, right? So this probably gets in, Kim, to some of what you've talked about, is you really have to start getting down to a very behavioral level of those. We can't just say, be a team player. Imagine coaching a group of students. Hey guys, be better team players. Thanks, how do I do that, right? So you have to create that point of view. And then, so that's the what. The how then, what we've really focused on is a strengths-based approach. And that is to say, you've got to spend as much, if not more time, kind of, as we would say, holding up the mirror and saying to students, for example, Ben, I noticed how when you opened the meeting, you just took the time to say, Liz, how have you been doing? I love how that just starts to build that psychological safety. That is a coaching move, as we described. So, but it's supportive. And I guarantee you, Ben will do that again, because he understands, okay, that high performing teams have good psych safety, and what I just did apparently built some of that. Great, guess I'll try that again. But you also want to offer that challenge. What's that next level work? Say, it'd be great as a team if you get a chance to just even take a minute to hear from everybody. Boom, that was my coaching move. So the what has got to be behavioral. The coaching move, we really drive around both support and challenge our next level of work. So that's kind of, a primer, I guess, to what we're up to.
Very interesting. I love that idea of really digging into what it looks like, right? How do you act curious? How do you act creatively? How do you communicate well? And that, of course, begs the question. There's a big difference between personalized competency-based teachers and versus the traditional. When you say you are measuring behaviors, it might be in a way that's not really helpful, right? So are you measuring whether or not you are doing your homework, whether or not you are late to class, whether or not you are chewing gum?
Yeah.
Things like this that may give you some feedback as maybe what not to do, but how does it help you grow, right? And so I think you're talking about using behaviors as a way to really key in on, how do we grow from here? What is this? Is this helpful? Did you get good results from that? And how can we get better next time? I wonder if anybody has had, situations with teachers or partners that they might be able to kind of illustrate a little bit of what we've been talking about here, because we're all kind of landing around this same idea that there are better measures. They're very hard to measure. So I wonder if there'd be an example or two that somebody could share, might give us a better idea of how it all plays out.
Yeah, Ben, I'll share a quick anecdote that I think holds relevance, and it was a number of years ago, so I'll share what details I recall, and we can see where it goes. But it was in a classroom in New Hampshire where we were practicing distributed leadership. So seeing the students as co-authors of their learning, and really welcoming them in with less of an agenda or standards-based or academic or human-based competencies or skills, but instead starting with interests and passions and questions, right? And like embracing curiosity and exploring students' interest in finding relevance in their worlds, and creating some guiding principles for projects, and then identifying skills. I know this is something that just came up. We focused on creativity. I did see in the chat too, how do you measure that? And we actually went to Sir Ken Robinson's research, and the idea that, as he defines it, imagination is bringing to thinking of things outside of the five senses. So a pink elephant in a tutu. It doesn't exist, but we all can see it right now, right? And that's what makes us unique as mammals, to have an imagination. And he defines creativity as applied imagination. So if you have an imagination, you can be creative. And so with that understanding, the students have a better grasp of what it means to be creative. And we co-created a definition of creativity and skill criteria. So 4 levels of what it means to be creative. Then went on these passion projects and came back and said 2 weeks later, what part in your project do you think displayed your ability to practice creativity? And so I think I'm painting a rather bright picture. There was a lot of speed bumps along the way, right? Like it took a lot to get there, but that was one of our early forays in taking the power that's in the classroom and sharing it with learners and teachers, and then co-creating those learning objectives, letting go of some of the need to organize things in 45-minute or 90-minute blocks and standards and objectives. And it was equal parts terrifying and rewarding.
That is so cool. That's a great story. Thank you so much. And, I've done this, but I'm excited about this conversation just as much as y'all are. And it's because that, I've been in this work too. And so certainly the highest impact that I ever saw was when we decided to go fully competency-based. When we said, we're not just going to do this mastery grading, we're going to do competency-based. And we were trying to figure that out too. And when that first year that I had with my American history students attempting to do competency-based, I went all the way into it as much as I could. And it became just a dialogue that I had with every student. And there were some students, because of our kind of, you might say flexible, some other people might have seen it as downright crazy, but our flexible scheduling that we built to try to attempt that our first year means I didn't see some students until after the first semester. I kind of tried to get them in my room before the end of the semester, but it didn't necessarily work out for all of them. But every single conversation I had was oriented around what they knew and what they still needed to know to meet an objective that we were both looking at. So that competency that I was trying to impart to them. And so that co-creation process, I think that you're speaking to, that in itself will carry the day, I think, in terms of you want your students to come out of this knowing what they know and how they can use it, right? Cool. So we've kind of been touching on a little bit of the how. And so I won't necessarily push us into that, but one of the more important pieces here is why. Why are we doing this hard, confusing work and not getting the answers, but still trying? what is it that you see is the real outcome of creating measures beyond what we typically assess in students and teachers and schools and society? Why are you doing this work?
So I sat in on a cognitive review of a pretty innovative district this week, and one of the teacher interviews, there was a quote, and the teacher said, we teach people, we teach human beings. And I was just floored that that was the thought, that they remembered that. It's not students, it's not scholars, all those are wonderful things. We're all humans. And I was just so thrilled to hear that in a district review as we speak about measuring things. But yeah, I think that's why I do, because we're all humans. And at the end of the day, we have to create systems that work for everybody.
Very nice.
I'll just quickly reference a quote from one of our coaches. So part of our coaching institute, we actually have the coaches go through the problem, working in a team. They are coached through the process of solving a real problem for a local business. That's sort of the first thing you do in our coaching institute. This particular group of coaches were working to solve a problem for a nonprofit in Raleigh, North Carolina called The Place at the Table, or APAT. And APAT is a pay what you can cafe. It was founded by Maggie Kane while she was still in college at NC State. She's celebrating her 31st birthday and has built an amazing community and successful nonprofit business. And what Maggie needed help with from this team of coaches was their business is about 80% volunteer. And if you know anything about running businesses, and even if you don't, you can imagine a bit of chaos coming out of an 80% volunteer work base. So she was really just like, I'm up at 3 a.m. I'm not sleeping, like I'm sending emails, people cancel, I'm trying to train new people, help. And at the end of the day, they were able to really sort of dig into that problem, bring real solutions back to APAT, which they used. And what the coach said in reflection on sort of the coaching institute was, he said, we got to make a real difference for Maggie and the APAT team and their customers. And his quote was, how rare is that? Why do we do this? We do this because this is an opportunity to add real value, and for our educators and for our students to be seen in the community as people who can add real value, not just people that we send over there to that building and lock it up for the day and then they come back into the community. No, like that we are sitting on a gold mine of problem solvers. And so that to me is the why. We've got to help people realize that.
I agree with both what Ann and Kim said. North Rowan started the journey with all of this because we're the underdog. We're the school that they wanted to shut down. We're the school that when you ask people in the county that we live about us, it's always negative. So we did this to add the value, to give our students a reason why, to let them see that they can solve these real world problems and that they can move further, to make them marketable, and give them and change the view of our school. And, we've done that. Our teachers have worked really hard. Our students have worked really hard. And now it's just about continuing that change and keeping that momentum going, and not falling back into we're just doing this for test scores.
Very good. Very nice, Rebecca. Thank you. Wonderful. I think it's important to kind of talk about what you guys are hitting on is that, there's a narrative that has been fed to us over the years, right? That if you do well on the tests, or you do well on your scores in that class, before there were all the tests that we had to pass across standardized, then you're going to be successful. And we know that that's just not the case anymore, right? We live in a different world. There are other things that we need to cultivate in our schools, so that when they join the community, which is just as soon as they walk out the door, right? And it's actually while they're in that room, they are still a part of the community. They are a part of it. They're not looking in, they're not wondering what it's like. And they're finding out who they are and what they can do before, they've paid a lot of money to decide about it. So thank y'all so much for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. I wish we had more time, but I'm certainly not going to keep anybody past 4:30 on a Friday. But let me go ahead and please, let me first just say, am I cutting anybody off? Does somebody want to add anything else that they were just kind of sitting on and I started to talk again? No, all right. Okay, next time then, we'll have more opportunity to share with each other. And you guys now are de facto members of the Better Measures for Learning community, which really is just an open space community in these first couple of years to really bring people in, get on the same page, learn the vocabulary, understand the reasons. I don't think anybody could argue with the whys that you put out there today, right? And get to a point where we can start to make some little shifts because we have the desire and we have the knowledge. So what we are going to do is we will, of course, share back out with you guys this recording along with writing up a bit of a blog to kind of talk about the kind of common insights that came out of this, potentially the resources that we've been sharing. So if there is anything that you would like, to share with the community in terms of what you do, what helps you do your work, what really comes out of your work, please share those with me or Liz or Jay. And we can find a way to embed that in the community and make it something that others can take and use. We're hoping to launch this community as soon as possible. We meant to launch it in September, yet here we are. It takes a process, and we are just really enjoying getting feedback, which is so important, and understanding what people are really working with. But it will be soon. And of course, you will be on that list. Please let us know if you have any other questions or ideas for this kind of community. We are, building it as we go, and we would love any feedback on that as well. If you would like to have a greater role in it, please let us know. And please just continue these conversations that you're having. I know one of the biggest things that I found meaningful in my life as an educator is having conversations with non-educators, my family, my friends, about why we do what we do, and starting conversations so that we can shift the narrative, not just in the education space, but in the public arena about what we're here to do to help our students. So thanks so much again for joining us, and y'all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And we have a little bit more to hear from Liz.
Yep, we just put a feedback link in the chat.
That's right, I almost forgot.
Like 2 seconds. It's really short, I promise.
Yes, we would love that feedback, and that's a good way to give it. It should be a pretty quick go. So thank you again, and thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, guys. Steve's here, by the way, finally.
Hey, there's Steve.
Happy Friday, y'all.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks all.
Thank you all.
Thank you. It was great.
So are you thinking of doing